more books translated to Spanish in 1 year than Arabic in 1,000 years. Actually, all of them live in war zones. And in some cases, it's like somebody tells me, well, my house was blown up, I couldn't finish the article.
Wow.
The teachers were in a way like forcing us to come, even though we had to walk on dead bodies to go to school. So the mission is making the inaccessible accessible. With the people I work with and I hear some of their inspirational stories, it's like I'm addicted to inspiration in a way.
This episode is brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for businesses. If you have ever wanted to grow your business faster than what you can right now, if you need to make more revenue, if you need more leads, if you need more clients, if you need to know how to plan your business in a strategic way in order to hit big goals, if you need to learn how to scale your business and grow your team and your business so that you have more freedom, then this program is for you. Imagine 3 days immersed with me where we cover all aspects of business, but we do it from an immersive but also an execution standpoint. We execute every step of the way. And we're looking at 5 key areas. We're looking at your psychology. We're looking at your marketing, your sales, your leadership, and we're looking at your planning and how we integrate these 5 key areas to grow your business and your brand quickly. So if you'd like to find out more information, kerwinray.com.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've got to tell you, this is an absolute honor to welcome to the Unstoppable, Faisal Saeed Al Mutar. Man, it's an absolute honor and pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
When I found out about you and I found out about your story, it was not only compelling, but I found it also emotional because being a family guy myself, I put myself in your shoes and thought, wow, what an incredible way to grow up. And also what an incredible mission to inspire as a result of the way that you grew up. So I'm going to think it's probably fair to assume that a lot of our audience probably don't even know who you are. So why don't you give us a very short rundown before we dive into your story about, who's Faisal, and how do we get here in a nutshell?
Well, thank you again for having me.
Pleasure.
My upbringing is actually divided to, I would say, like multiple chapters in my life.
Yeah, okay.
And the first chapter is when I was born in Babylon. So I was born in Babylon, Iraq.
Right.
Close to, I'm sure many of your audience know that part, the historical town. And my parents both happened to study in the UK. My dad is an orthopedic surgeon, my mom is a lawyer. So we fit kind of the stereotypical Asian family in that regard. So that's why I swear the first chapter of my life, which is we were surrounded by cousins and family, and we had talk about family atmosphere. That was the case. Then my dad got a job at the capital city in Baghdad, and then we moved in a kind of a residential neighborhood that many of the people who used to live there were some of Saddam Hussein's generals.
Right.
And the reason this is important is because of the third chapter.
Okay.
So that was kind of the second chapter of my life, which is moving to a big city in which kind of like tribe and last name doesn't matter as much compared to the small town we come from.
Right.
And then the Iraq war happened. That was in 2003. So I was born in 1991. So I moved to Baghdad in 2003. The Iraq war happened in 2003. So 12 years, 11 years. 12 years. Yeah, I got my math wrong. And so the neighborhood that used to be surrounded by a lot of generals had to flee the country. So what used to be a residential neighborhood became an empty neighborhood.
Right.
And what replaced them were members of Al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations.
Yeah. Right.
So what used to be a kind of a normal residential neighborhood became a war zone, mainly by militias, but also the U.S. Army was also close by, so there was a lot of clashes. And then as the time was growing, so how does that look like in practice is dead bodies on the streets, there are mortars and rockets flying from neighborhood to neighborhood. So that was kind of the life pretty much of like 2004, 5, 6, 7. My crazy me, it was, okay, why don't people get along feeling of like, there's all this sectarian warfare.
Why is everybody fighting? Why can't everyone just get along?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as a result of just this simple message, I ended up being on death lists and death threats and all of that. So then I had to leave Iraq in 2009.
Yeah.
And I flew to Lebanon. And then there was another war happening in Lebanon, so I had to flee Lebanon. And then I went to Malaysia, which is close enough to where you are. And I lived there and I applied for refugee status. And then I arrived to the United States in 2013.
Wow.
And here I am. I as of 6 months ago, I became a U.S. citizen. So
wow, congratulations.
This is now my new home.
And you've set up this incredible organization.
Yes, Ideas Beyond Borders.
Yeah.
And that is in this. I mean, when I landed in America, I was like, hey, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
It's a new country, English is the first language. There's a lot of adaptation need to happen. So the first few months, I was just really trying to understand what's going on. And then there's actually an incredible story happened. I made a post on Facebook saying, what is the best city to celebrate the 4th of July? I'm a new immigrant. I would love to see the best fireworks, really. And there was a family in Virginia, in DC area, who were like, well, DC is the place. And then I get a call. Does your name on Facebook match your name and ID? I'm like, yeah, I'm not. And they're like, okay, we're gonna fly you a ticket and you can stay with us to celebrate the 4th of July in our house. And I was like, this is too good to be true. So I got the ticket, United Airlines, flying from Houston, Texas, where I was shuttled to DC. And I called the airline. I was like, does this? They're like, yes, Mr. Mutar, yeah, you have it. Look, for real? Then I was like, well, what is there to lose? I went and took the flight. And that meeting was actually a life-changing experience, because this is like a family that I had no idea they exist. And then they're like, we believe in you, we believe in your mission, we believe in who you are and all of that. And then actually I moved there. So after a few months, I actually lived with them.
Wow.
For almost a year.
Okay.
And they were like, we are here to support you, because my family was still in Iraq at the time. And they're like, we've always wanted to help people, and you seem like to be the right candidate of the person you want to help. And we have a daughter that studies in New Mexico, and we have a 2-bedroom house, so might as well use the other room. And so that's kind of the second chapter of America. Like the first chapter, I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And then this family came into my life. And then I started getting more into work and
what was your work at that time?
So there was a project started by Google called movements.org, and that's how I actually started. So the mission of that program was called the Match.com for human rights.
Wow.
Which is a very interesting platform that, let's say if you are a women's rights activist in Iraq, want media coverage,
right,
and you are a journalist who covers women's rights in Iraq, we do a match between the request and the offer.
Wow.
So they were like, okay, you seem to be the right candidate, you know a lot of people, you believe in the mission, all of that. So that actually was my first full-time job in the US, which is pretty good start for many of the...
Yeah.
And then, so as I was in that kind of phase of life, I was giving talks around the country, I was introduced...
And these talks, like what were you... Because you talked about the family, they were inspired by your mission when you went and stayed with them. Like at this point, you had started to solidify what you wanted to do.
Yes.
And what did that look like? What was the...
I mean, it's work in progress. I mean, there's always time to solidify the mission better. But generally, I'm very curious. I mean, when I was growing up, as somebody who grew up in English, my parents were able to taught me English since I was young, is that I've always felt privileged that I had more access to knowledge than everyone around me.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is verified by statistics and facts that there are more books translated to Spanish in 1 year than Arabic in 1,000 years.
Wow.
So imagine most of the world knowledge on the internet or in print is actually not available in Arabic. So I've always had this belief that I do believe that access to knowledge is a human right. And the fact that many people who were around me did not have any access to most of what we know in the world has constantly motivated me to make knowledge accessible to people.
Right.
So that's kind of been kind of the drive that I've...
Which is the drive behind Ideas Beyond
Ideas
Borders.
Beyond Borders, and also like most of the work I had before is that I want to help people know more about the world.
So is Ideas Beyond Borders really making knowledge and information available into areas that perhaps it wouldn't normally be available because of the language barrier?
Exactly. So
wow.
So the mission is making them accessible.
Wow.
So
and so are you penetrating schools and universities? How does that look? Like what does the model look like?
So it's divided into 3 kind of sections. Number 1 section is books. So these are people who translate just books, which is a 12 months project.
Yeah.
And also we create summary videos of the books.
Okay.
So that way those who don't have not necessarily the ability to read, but the kind of the energy to read, they will just watch a video. Attention span, they watch a video that tells them most of the book is about. And that is where really a big fraction of our money goes to. But also at the same time, we have a team of 120 people who are all across the Arab world who translate Arabic Wikipedia articles.
Wow.
So most of, again, because of the lack of content, Arabic Wikipedia was pretty much empty before we started. So most of what you see in English Wikipedia is not available in Arabic Wikipedia. And talk about, constant inspiration, because in a work that is in a constant tension and war and stuff, even if you live in a safe area, you also need to have a constant inspiration to continue doing what you're doing. And these are the people who constantly give me inspiration. Some of them, not some of them, actually all of them live in war zones. And in some cases it's like somebody tells me, well, my house was blown up, I couldn't finish the article.
Wow.
And at the same time, they find the energy.
A little bit different to someone saying, "Oh, the dog ate my homework." Yeah.
It's so like, I'm sorry, I couldn't do it. And at the same time, they go next week and actually do the work. So this is like the type of people that I constantly work with. Are people with constant dedication.
And so you're impacting people through that information by obviously creating a lot more opportunities, not just at a professional level, but also I'm going to assume at an entrepreneurial level as well.
Yes, exactly. So many of these people are because of working with us, they're also being connected to international institutions and connected kind of to the globe while they're living in the war zone. So
what are some of the impacts that you've seen as a result of the information distribution?
Amazing. One of the things is like what I really love is that at the beginning it started as an idea. I was like, okay, this needs to be done and let me do it. And then the demand has been huge. So, just the Wikipedia articles received up to like 18 million views of the stuff that we have translated. And the demand, and on a personal level, these translators are, many of them, there's a lot of issues of unemployment and many of them now are having full-time salary with us and they're really living in a way a much better life than they used to. And now they feel inspired to be like, oh, I have ideas I also want to implement and start a new business. And I've seen you as somebody who grew up like us to actually build that. Maybe I can build that too. Now it actually gave me inspiration for me to do it. And this is actually constant messages and emails I get from many of these translators. They're like, okay, it seems like, in a way it's like kind of a trickle effect, is that I was inspired and started this, and now I'm inspiring them to start their own businesses and that's pretty amazing. And they do like a lot of they have, as of now, roughly like 8 million or 9 million words have been translated by them. They're like a machine of constant.
Over what period of time?
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years.
So IBB is about 3 years old.
Okay.
It's still a new baby in a way. Yeah. And the third, so that's also a lot of work there. And the third one is the universities.
Right.
So. Long story short, there's this another inspirational individual. His name is Amin, and he reached out to me and he's heard about us doing Wikipedia and everything. And so ISIS was actually going to take over his town, and he knew that. He kind of predicted that. He saw the news and he was like, okay, I have to do something. So he bought a generator and connected it to his computer, and he downloaded all of Wikipedia. And when ISIS actually took over his town, he was printing these articles and giving it to his students to kind of keep them reading and not to lose the momentum of education. They wanted to keep them. And I was like, wow, like this is really happening. And he's like, well, now my university is destroyed, but it's now being rebuilt. How about I try to get some of my students who I used to nurture as all of that war happening to actually become translators for you. I was like, that sounds like an incredible idea.
Wow, how many students have you got?
So there are 10.
Oh.
And then the news spread, we opened up in that university, then other universities are reaching out.
Wow.
Like, oh, you heard you're doing work in University of Mosul, we're in other provinces. And now we expanded actually to 6 universities, and we have 4 potential actually joining us. So by the pretty much mid-year we're going to end up in 10 universities, and every university will have 10 students.
That's amazing.
And so kind of like there's also another trickle effect because of this guy. I was like, wow, like now we have to probably expand to the university market, and that's kind of a more institutional work. So yes, it's been a kind of a constant learning experience. I mean, you're familiar a lot with the business world, and it's
and it's a tough gig, you know, especially in because I'm going to assume you're not for profit.
We're not for profit, yeah.
And you know, especially in that space, that can be challenging because like that space is often driven by, you know, very philanthropic-minded individuals, but not necessarily very entrepreneurially-minded individuals. So I'm curious as to how did you commercialize this in a way that enabled you to either, you know, get access to funds or raise funds or create funds in order to fund what it is that you do?
Yeah, I mean that's the. I mean the way I see it is like with business is that you're selling the product to the individual and the individual is buying the product. While in nonprofits is the money is coming not from the consumer.
Yeah.
So in a way, I have to convince other people that this is important to the consumer, and this is an ongoing learning experience. What really helped is that in this age of social media, I'm able to reach far more people than before. I mean, it's not because of a lot of things happening in the United States, and there's a lot of political gridlock in a way. Stories like mine don't get as much coverage. And I was able to utilize social media to the maximum. I mean, I really abused the system in a way and kind of like telling people about these stories of these people, constantly sharing the issue and the problem, why it needs to be solved. And then people start popping up. It's like, oh, I want to help. I run a small business, but I can use you as your like kind of the side income that I can give to you. And I mean, as of now, we're pretty successful. I mean, we raised almost $1 million a year.
Wow, that's
US dollars. And
how do you go about doing that?
It's from about like now. I mean, I on my Facebook page, I have about 350,000 followers, and that is where pretty much most of the income comes from. That's from the people who follow
donations.
Donations. And for those who are in the US, they can get a tax deduction. Not that necessarily that's the motive, but it's kind of a financial motive for why people give money as well.
Yeah.
And many people feel like is that these are things that I mean, there's when people think of the Middle East, they generally think of war and conflict, and they really haven't seen much change. Is that there are all these wars and conflict happening, but there's hardly any good story. And they see, well, seems like IBB is actually the good stories, that there is some things happening on the ground that might change things for the better.
Yeah.
And for the Middle East, I mean, I sometimes joke about this. I say the Middle East is the opposite of Las Vegas. What happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. So in a way, yes, many people might think of it as a far region. That's a 10-hour flight. Why would I be concerned about there? But for example, for Europe, it's just across the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And I mean, the US is pretty lucky in a way that it's surrounded by oceans, that many of the conflicts in the Middle East doesn't affect it. But at the same time, the US is also involved internationally. So the other businesses and commercial and even lives of many people who live in the Middle East of American origin are also threatened. So there is a lot of interest in the Middle East in general because of kind of the conflicts that arise there have an effect. And so that's kind of from the geopolitical side. But at the same time, there is, just like the story of the people who really hosted me in their house, there's a lot of energy and kind of positive energy of people really wanting to help. And they see this as a good cause that we're now not changing just this generation, but this knowledge. I mean, what happens in the internet actually also doesn't leave the internet. It just stays in the internet, and people will be able to, through generations, will be able to read this content and hopefully be inspired and do more great things.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because I know how I've got a lot of clients that are in the charity space, and it can be very difficult oftentimes to create a value proposition getting someone to donate. So the fact that you're generating $1 million in revenue every year, congratulations for that. But I think, you know, one of the challenges that people have when it comes to donating for everything is being able to relate to the cause.
Yes.
And I think you're right. Like with the Middle East, it's typically one of those places that everybody associates with conflict. But normally from a disassociated perspective, they normally see it like as a headline on Fox or, as a newspaper article. And it's not until they really sometimes hear the stories of the individuals who have lived there that they really go, oh shit, wow, like they can really connect with the message. So I'm curious, like your journey, like I know we skipped over it pretty quickly to get to IBB, and Ideas Beyond Borders is an incredible organisation where you're giving access to an enormous amount of information to people who wouldn't normally get it, which is going to affect obviously everything from political, geopolitical, education, professional, entrepreneurial. But I'm super curious as to how did we get there? Because your journey is essentially what created this outcome. So you were born in Babylon.
Yes.
Which is a historical city, like by all accounts.
Yeah.
And so Babylon, when you were born there, was quite a small town?
Yes, it's more like a suburb of the big city.
Right, okay.
And it's about 1 hour south of Baghdad.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's Iraq, now I live in the United States. Iraq is smaller. I mean, I think it's half the size of Texas. It's it's generally a small country. So that's what I was born in a pretty small house. I mean, it was kind of a district with normal
And you lived there to what age?
I lived there up to age 9.
And what were your parents doing while you were living there?
So my dad was practicing medical profession.
Okay.
He's an orthopedic surgeon.
Right.
And
he had studied in London, had he?
He studied in Edinburgh, he studied in the UK. And my mom, at the time I was growing up, was a housewife, even though she studied law, but there were a lot of kids. So, I mean, I'm 1 out of 5.
Wow.
So that was, for her, it's a triple full-time job.
That's like, that's 5 full-time jobs. I've got a 6-year-old boy as a single parent. That's like 5 full-time jobs. And she look, were you surrounded by family? Like, were you brought up by the village, so to speak?
It was, I mean, we had a very good relationship with our neighbors. And there were times in which my mom just drops me at the neighbor house, and then I used to play with the kids there. And so especially when there are a lot of working moms also was in the neighborhood. Whenever was the holiday, you put the kid over there, and then the other woman take a holiday, so another way to take care of the other kids. So we used to kind of be in a close community in a way, like there was this sense of comfort, is that there was always somebody out there to take care of you, and which did not happen when you move kind of to the bigger city, which we did. And also my relatives, and most of them live in Babylon as well.
Okay.
So my cousins and my uncles, and so there was kind of more the extended family.
And it was quite a peaceful time for you?
I mean, yeah, very peaceful. Okay. And by comparison to actually the other stages.
And then you moved into Baghdad at the age of 9.
Yeah, and then the war happened at the age of 12.
But when you moved to Baghdad, you moved into an area, I'm going to assume because of your parents' stature, your dad was a higher working class man?
Middle class, yeah.
And so as a result, you were living in areas where you were surrounded by a lot of Saddam Hussein's higher brass, top-end brass.
Or their children, because these are the ones who I used to go to elementary school.
Of course, right.
And they were from the higher upper middle class, if not more than upper middle class.
Yeah, right.
And
military.
And some of them had military parents.
Right,
and in a way that, so they were, I mean, in the dictatorship, they were also, it kind of trickles down to kids. Is that you see that even as a child, but many of them filled with ego, and belong to this family, and so I was in a way kind of the kid that they used to beat up.
Right.
So
you got bullied a lot as a kid, did you? Or once you moved to Baghdad?
Well, when I started moving to Baghdad, I mean, there were some of these kids who were kind of aggressive, and one of them, I mean, he used to like stand by the door. And whenever, like, if my mom makes me a sandwich or anything, and he comes and beat me up, takes a sandwich, and I was one of his clients. He had like multiple clients that he used to beat up and
and get lunches.
Yeah, and get lunches. Wow. or kind of intimidation. Like he was in constant. So there were like some of these kids around.
Yeah.
Who, like, by age 10 and 11, they were like already amazingly aggressive and violent, and I was kind of like this simple kid from small city or small town coming to this kind of very aggressive environment.
And so was that do you remember that as being between the ages of 9 and were you 11 when the invasion occurred?
12.
12?
Yeah.
Do you remember that being of stark contrast to going to yourself like, oh my God, this is a whole new environment? And starting having maybe emotions and feelings of fear that you hadn't had before?
I mean, I was in a constant feel of like kind of being threatened by these bigger guys.
Yeah.
And there were days in which like there was constant discomfort.
Yeah.
But in a way, it's like you start being creative, and I start making friendships with other big guys.
Yeah, right.
So I was like, I cannot defeat these big guys.
Yeah.
It's a lost cause. But
he can, and maybe if I become friends with him, he'll...
so if I figure out a way in which I can organize a coalition, and this coalition will be able to be my defense mechanism.
Yeah, right.
And so in a way, that was kind of the first things that came to mind, is that, okay, now I'm being beaten up, let me try to figure out other ways.
Did that work?
It did work.
Yeah, nice.
And so in a way, it's like, other than getting beaten up and giving the sandwich to that guy, I had to give the sandwich to my friend.
But you just didn't get beaten up.
Yeah, but at least I didn't get beaten up. So I still lost the sandwich.
Yeah.
The sandwich is gone.
Yeah.
But
you kept your face.
But at least I kept my sanity and my physical...
and so do you remember where you were? Because, obviously at the age of 12, that's a very impressionable age. That's when we're absorbing so much. We're just about to enter into puberty, or sometimes we are. But I'm curious for you, do you remember where you were when you knew the invasion was starting, when it was occurring?
I know it very well.
Okay.
So our house in Baghdad was on the highway.
Okay.
And that is the highway where the US tanks came in and
rolled in
to Baghdad from.
Right.
So it was kind of a very interesting feeling, and in which on the local news, we only had local news, and then they were telling us is that the US Army is defeated and they're still in the south part of Iraq, and everything is okay, and we won the war and everything. And then wake up in a usual morning, and then the US tanks just rolled in front of the house. And we were watching from the glass. We're like, and then actually they fired a bullet on us because they thought that we were like an army or something. So we started hiding. We started hiding downstairs. And my elementary school became a base for the Iraqi army. So my elementary school was actually close to our house.
Okay.
And so for like 3-4 days, it is between rockets from the tanks to the school, and there's a fight back. And so the house was constantly shaking. And also like we hear like the glass is being breaking, and like we can hear like some bullets are being fired at our house. And there were sometimes some of the Iraqi soldiers were jumping from a house to a house to fire at the US Army.
Yeah.
And then one of my friend's brothers, who was an officer in the army, started knocking and screaming at our door. And he took off all his military clothing, and he's like, please hide me. I don't want like the Americans to kill me. And he just like came to our house and stayed with us.
Wow.
Because there was a compulsory military service. I mean, the guy had no will really to fight in the army, but he just was forced to. And he come and rolled to our house, started hiding with us.
You're 12 years old. Like, I know you grew up in the Middle East, but had you experienced this kind of conflict before? Like, you'd heard about it, I'm going to assume?
My parents have.
Right.
My dad was born in 1945, and my mom 1947, and he pretty much lived a war after war. I mean, there was this, I think, statistic that if you were born in the 50s or the 60s, you pretty much have lived 5 wars in your life.
So when this was all going down, were you looking at Dad and he's just like, it's okay, I've been through this before, and you're like, but Dad, there's like fucking bombs and bullets. It's like, was he quite cool about it, or was he? Do you remember his response?
I mean, his response was, trying to keep us all calm down.
Okay, so you're 12, you got bullets coming in your house, tanks rolling in, rockets going between your school and the American forces, your house is shaking all day long. What's going on in your head? Like really, seriously, I'm curious, like you're a 12-year-old boy, you're growing up, like what's going on in your mind? Like how do you rationalize this reality?
I think for my case I start rationalizing it later, because in this situation is that you're pretty much living the moment, because you really have no perception.
There's no past, there's no future, it's like I just need to survive.
And and in a way there was like some days of humor, like when somebody's like, oh, I feel I want to use the restroom, and then everybody's like laughing. It's like, well, all this war is happening, like somebody wants to use the restroom, and between of us is like we so in a way is that I wasn't much thinking. I was really living in the present moment to the maximum possibility, and really in a way appreciate what I have right now, because I don't know if I'm gonna lose it or not.
So you were actually experiencing gratitude
and bonding.
Wow.
And because it's like, this is a moment. I mean, I didn't know what death was in a way. I didn't think of it in that way. But I knew that people disappear after that. So there was this constant feeling of like, I have to appreciate what I have right now and really feel bonding to everyone around me. And so that was kind of, if there was a feeling, it was that feeling. And of course the feeling of fear. But that feeling, the bonding feeling was actually took over the feeling of fear. Even though all of that was happening, it's just that, I mean, I think I can say the same for my family. I mean, we're pretty much just focused on the moment and really bonding with each other and appreciating the fact that all of us are still alive and really living that minute by minute, expecting that the future will be better.
Yeah.
And it did. I mean, in a way, like after the war ended, which, I mean, from our end, that was kind of the most, because that's where the tanks came in, and then the tanks moved to the center of Baghdad, and then the war ended. But really not ended. It's just at the time we thought it ended. And so after a few days, things started calming down a bit. So then like we kind of were able to breathe again.
Okay.
And really really look around.
And so how long did that period of time go on for? Where you were like, where there was all that chaos before the other militias and ISIS started to move in?
So yeah, that didn't last long.
Okay.
Just a few days after the war, there was kind of looting, and there were a lot of people stealing from schools and stealing from museums, and so that was like the day after. I mean, the day of the fall of Saddam Hussein is April 9th, 2003. And by April 10th, there were people on the streets stealing stuff. And so the chaos immediately was emerging. But my neighborhood started being impacted by 2004, 2005. That's where many of the generals and many of the people started leaving the houses.
Okay. So they stayed for a period?
They stayed for like the first few months, and then many of them started leaving.
Okay.
So that's where kind of the transition happened in between families and kids into militias. So
it went from being a normal, respectable, what you'd call a stereotypical urban neighborhood?
Yeah, to a residential neighborhood, yes.
Yeah, to then within a period of months being occupied by dangerous rocket machine gun wielding militia.
From all over, actually in a way, from all over the world. There were some people who spoke Afghan and some people spoke Chechen. There were a lot of, so it was kind of the Times Square of terrorism.
Wow.
In terms of many of the people were actually international criminals, who were not just locals, but rather
international opportunists.
Yes, who some of them came to Iraq before the war, but some of them came after. And so kind of the scene of the neighborhood started changing very rapidly from usual kids playing on the street, playing soccer, into, well, there's a sniper rifle guy with a hidden face in that house, and there is somebody putting a bomb in the road, and there is somebody having a mortar rifle rocket firing. So like the scene immediately changed, and also the stores started closing. Many of them started closing. There was a sometimes shortage of stuff in the stores. So that's when I started moving to high school, and they blew up the police station in front of the high school like on the first week.
Wow.
So my high school neighborhood was as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than my residential neighborhood.
And the police station was across the road. Well, it was across the road.
Yeah.
And does that affect you as a 12-year-old when you go into high school and the police station, like the people who are supposed to make you feel safe, like they get bombed?
So it's.
Did you keep going to school during this period?
Yeah, and unfortunately, and in a way, because there were times in which the teachers were in a way like forcing us to come, even though we had to walk on dead bodies to go to school.
No.
So there were times like when the militias were fighting, they just throw the dead bodies in the middle of the road.
Right.
And then the bus that we used to take just stops by the dead bodies because it cannot cross. So then we had to leave the bus, the school bus, and then have to walk over these dead bodies in some days to actually go to school.
Yeah.
And then the teachers were
And
like,
how old are you this, like 13?
so I was going up. That was like 13, 14, 15. So
I think it's important to pause for a moment and have everyone at home, like literally stop for a moment and just wonder what that would be like. You know, either for themselves, you know, being dropped to school, because most of us, you know, who probably listen to this audience have been used to being dropped to school or dropping our kids to school. But it kind of adds a whole nother dimension when you think about, you know, either you're a child and you're being dropped to school, or you're dropping your kids to school, and the only way they can enter the school is they've got to walk past, what, I'm talking 5, 10?
Yeah.
How many bodies would you?
yeah, sometimes more,
Yeah.
and sometimes less. It depends on how active the day was in
Yeah,
terms
wow.
of the warfare. Yeah,
That's a reality check.
and
And you guys kept going to school.
yes,
Because what's interesting in many respects, some people say, well, no, I'd never let my child do that. But it's almost like, well, there's a level of, oh God, I wouldn't say rebellion, but a level of, well, no, I'm going to get educated no matter what. Like, I am not going to let, and as extreme as this sounds, a dead body on the road prevent me from getting an education. What was the motivation to keep going to school when you had to walk across a dozen dead bodies?
the positive one is like seeing my friends again.
Yeah.
So there was that feeling is that you keep going because there is something good at the end. You're going to see your friends, you're going to play some soccer, play some billiards, joke with each other. So that's kind of the positive one. And really it's like as you said, is that you have to do it. And also when you grow up in war, you think this is the normal.
Yeah.
So in a way, I mean, talk about a sudden realization. Actually, just as of a year ago, I was really sitting at my friend's patio and we were chatting and everything. And out of a sudden it came to me that I'd been safe for a while. Like it just kind of is that I'm not, it's been few years that I can go from my apartment to work and I'm zero worried about like conflict. And
Did it take you a while?
It did take a
Because I'm going to assume there might have been some residue trauma, residue PTSD or something, because I'm going to assume there was something there. And when you came here, it was like, do I still have to be on guard?
So at the beginning when I moved here, I was in this constant stage of constantly feeling on guard.
Yeah.
But then after a while, I start quote unquote integrating, at least mentally integrating.
Yeah.
And it came into me as like, wow, this safety thing is cool. Like this ability to not worry and look around all the time is actually, there's something great to it. So I started appreciating that so much. So there, like to make my mindset back there is that it's constant feeling you have to be worried about everything. And then as the conflict rises, the level of trust between individuals are declining. So, because some of my high school friends start becoming sympathetic to terrorist groups.
So it went from becoming, in some respects, a bonding experience for some of you,
yes,
to then fractional.
Yeah. So then start becoming very worried about what I say. Because maybe this person is hearing, even though he's a colleague in my high school, he might be affiliated with a terrorist group, or he might be part of the warfare. So in a way, it's like you start trusting your best friends more because each one of us are sharing secrets with each other.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's this constant friction between you and pretty much everybody around you.
That's a whole nother evolution of schooling. Like, because most people, their challenge at school is a bully. You know, if they're lucky, maybe there's a little school gang. But it's very rare that you'd have someone in your school that is like, or multiple in school that are members of international terrorist organizations.
Are sympathetic to this.
Or sympathetic, I should say.
So that is kind of the constant feeling, the negative feeling is that you're very worried about your surroundings, you're very, very worried about the people. But that is, after you live in it for a while, it just becomes a normal. So in a way, there is nothing you can compare it to. Like you don't know what, in a way, a good life looks like. I mean, you don't know what a safety looks like. You imagine this is what life is, and then you just live day by day.
It's Monday through Friday.
And in a way, there is a kind of an inspirational thing. For example, like when there's a terrorist attack happening in the neighborhood or in a crowded neighborhood, and there's, let's say, 30 people killed, and there is glasses are shattered, and sometimes within hours, you see like people fixing the glass of the restaurant or the store, cleaning up the street, because generally like bombs create a hole in the street, and they see people like filling it up, and then within sometimes hours, just life continues, and the bus is back to work, and
people just shake it off.
People just shake it off, and in a way that, I mean, I think of it sometimes as negative because people are not reflecting as much as how can we really stop this from happening again. But at the same time, it's inspirational because the will to live, the will to actually to be prosperous and to bring food to your kids and to serve others is still constantly happening. So with all of the conflict and the war, in a way, life was still working, at least functional in terms of the basics. The bus might work, even though the bus driver might be killed, then his cousin is now the bus driver.
It sounds like extremely high-functioning dysfunction.
One way of putting it, It's
So you're
from
like
chaos, there was like some order in the middle of that chaos.
Well, and that's what's so interesting, because you can't have chaos without order, and you can't have order without chaos. So it's amazing to be able to witness that in hindsight and see it playing out. There's almost a level of beauty or divine perspective to be able to see the order and the chaos at the same time. So
I didn't think of it as divine back then, but there's definitely
of course.
But it's just, I mean, the positive thing is like, in a way, when I was surrounded by that environment, I was also able to keep the will to live. I mean, I also keep
you're motivated.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, very motivated. I mean, there's always. In a way, it also becomes addictive. It's like even now, like when with the people I work with and I hear some of their inspirational stories, it's like I want to be constantly motivated by this kind of willful people who are trying to create great changes. So in a way, it's like I'm addicted to inspiration in a way.
That is so cool.
Because it's and especially like with many of the folks I work with now is like, they have every reason to be desperate. They have every reason to give up, but they keep going. And I think that energy, despite all of the chaos, is pretty inspirational.
And so you're at 13, 14. What happens next? Things start to deteriorate more?
Worse. Yeah. So there was a very significant event happened in Iraq when there was a mosque called the Askari Mosque, which is considered like one of the most amazing symbols of Shia Islam, and it was blown up by Al-Qaeda. And then as a result, the war started becoming more regional. So Iran and many of its militias started becoming involved. And then there was more, like that kind of put sectarian warfare multiplied by 100. So there was forced deportation of people who are from a sect, they had to move to a different one. And this is when I had to develop a fake ID.
Right.
So I had an ID that had a different last name. It's because you can know someone's sect from the last name they belong to. So one had a last name that was Sunni and one had a last name that was Shia. So if I go around different neighborhoods in the Baghdad, I had to learn, even me and my friends were learning, that was like 13, 14, learning how to say it with confidence that you belong to that sect.
Yeah.
So in a way we were like training with each other, playing with each other, until we figured out that if you get stopped by a militia of X, you know what to say. And so...
And that happened a lot?
Yes. I mean, for me it wasn't a lot because my neighborhood started becoming on one sect because the segregation has increased a lot. So we really had to stay within very homogeneous sect.
Yeah.
It happens more in the neighborhood that were close to us.
Right.
And that's where these neighborhoods were firing rockets at my neighborhood, and then my neighborhood was firing rockets at their neighborhood.
Right.
So in a way, these areas were not able to talk to each other in the first place.
Wow.
So I didn't really use my fake ID that much.
Yeah.
Even though my fake ID is the one that kept me in my neighborhood.
Right.
But my fake ID became my ID.
Right.
And I stopped using my real ID.
Yeah.
So the fake became the normal because my neighborhood became, with Al-Qaeda, it was more of a Sunni background, Sunni influence, mine from Shia background. So my fake ID became the normal.
You're right.
So in ways, like, you have to adopt a personality of a spy of some sort. Is that you have to believe that you are somebody of a last name.
Yes.
So, and you become the embodiment of it in a way, and
to survive.
Yeah. So as I was growing up, actually, like, in a way, it's time to convince myself that I actually belong to that sect and have that last name, and it worked in a way really well. I mean, the fact that I'm still alive showed that it worked. Is that I was able to walk around in this neighborhood, and even though, like, if Al Qaeda knew who I really am, or at least knew what my last name is, my real last name is, I would be dead. But I was able to say it with complete confidence, and.
But you say you were pretty lucky. You know, you mainly stuck to your own neighborhood. But from memory, from some of the notes that I did scan, you were either kidnapped or attempted to be kidnapped?
So, yes.
A number of times.
3 times.
3 times.
And I would, so that is when the most memorable one.
The most memorable kidnapping.
Because
I have never had a guest say that before.
I hope I'm not the first one, but
you are the first one, and probably the last. But I'm so curious, please.
So I was moving in time. So that was when I was 17,
okay.
And so I was walking in the neighborhood, and I think there was the worst spread that I had a fake ID.
Right.
And so Al Qaeda's car stopped actually very close to me, and there was a guy at the back of the car, because they're mostly covered face, they cover the face, and like get him. So there was a guy coming outside the car to actually get me, and then a US Humvee just came in.
Oh.
And the guy shouting to other guys like, come, the US Army's arrived. So they came to the car and they left. And the guy was faster than me. The guy who was actually trying to kidnap me was much faster than me.
Right.
And so I was most likely, like, I was getting kidnapped. And that was a moment, in a way, it's like I felt absolute weakness because I was amazingly vulnerable. That was a time in which really, like, if that Humvee didn't show up, or if that I would be really defeated. I would be losing in that scenario.
You'd possibly be dead.
Most likely.
Yeah.
And so in a way I felt amazing like weakness and vulnerability, but at the same time I felt that I need to make a decision that I need to be now more in control of my life.
Oh, wow.
So in that situation, there were like 2 feelings happening at the same time. One that is amazing weakness of like like how weak I was. I was
deep vulnerability.
Like deep vulnerability, and that this guy was faster than me. I was and very less powerful. And then that other feeling of like, okay, I have to be in control of my destiny right now. And I think that is I think as of today is still a significant motive for me to why I started an organization, or I became a kind of entrepreneurial in a way, and kind of now I recognize there is a problem and it's my duty to solve it, and I think I have the power to solve it. And if not, I will create the power to solve it. So that feeling of when I was 17-year-old is still a constant motivator even today. And now that is almost 13 years later. I mean, even when I left Iraq, I was by myself. So I was my parents were still in Iraq, and so I had to do all of the Lebanon, Malaysia stuff all by myself. So I was just me with my bags.
How old?
I was 18 when I left the country.
Wow.
So that, even though with all of the kind of the chaos that I was surrounded with, that was and still is my constant motivator. Is that I have to be in control of my destiny, and I have to be able to really use that power to create lives better for others.
What an unusual blessing, like in every respect, you know, because most 18-year-olds, you know, if they're taking a year off, they're doing their gap year and traveling the world and backpacking. You had your life in a suitcase and you were just trying to, you know, find somewhere that you could live and be safe.
That's a different meaning of backpacking. Yeah.
So I know you've got a big family. You've got 5 siblings, but I also know you lost your brother.
Yeah, so we have 4 siblings. So we're 5.
5 of you.
Yeah, and
how old were you when you lost your brother?
So that was when I was 17.
Same year.
That was so as I said, this was the time of the absolute conflict.
Right.
When things were
Really
chaos multiplied by 100. And on on a usual day, I was already worried that something is bad happen to my family. It is like, we cannot be that lucky.
Yeah.
We are 7, and
had you seen every family that you knew at that point had been touched in some way?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And I was seeing dead bodies on the streets every day.
Yeah.
So the constant feeling of conflict and death was like just a daily reality.
Yeah.
And just in a usual day of in Iraq, a usual day, not in the US, but militia is on the street and everything. And my brother, who was a computer scientist, who also had a startup, really, with some of his friends who also were startup people, were just driving, going to work, and one of these militias just stopped them and they disappeared.
All of them?
Yeah. There were 8, 4 survived, because they let the first car move, and then the second car was where my brother was, and then the 3 other friends, and then these guys disappeared. So I was I knew negative, not that I trust my instinct, but like I knew something was gonna happen to us, to the family, to the way that when I came home from school, when I heard the news, I didn't have a shock, and I wasn't really that shocked. I was like, we're 7, there's this constant warfare. I'm hearing that my friends' brothers are being killed, their cousins are being killed. And I was constantly like telling my family, we have to leave the country. It happened. So that is on my family relations. It really changed the whole atmosphere in my family. It became filled with sadness and grief, and
I can imagine.
And it was like a period of time until we know that he was killed. Like there was this period of kidnapping, and there was this businesses really that start popping up in that era, in which, okay, if you give me 5,000 Iraqi dinar or 50,000, I'm gonna hear the news about where your son is right now. And my parents were in this constant bargaining with many of these people who were lying to them. Many of these companies are frauds. They just utilize this emotions. They know that grieving moms and grieving dads just want to hear some good news, and then they're like, oh, I saw your kid in a prison. If you just give us few money, I will go talk to him. I might be able to free him from the prison, stuff like that. So that was in a way more torturous than actually even hearing the story that he was killed.
Yeah.
Because it was in this, at least for my parents, I immediately believed that he was killed. I was like, I've seen it happening to everyone around me, so I wasn't that optimistic. But my parents were just leeching on to whatever positive news there is that they can hear. And rightly so. I mean, so there were all these people start popping up. The moment they hear like someone's kid is being kidnapped, or they start calling and like, oh, I heard your story. I know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and if you give us some money, and that stayed for more than a year. So the thing happened in November 2007. So that was like until like 2009. That was the situation.
So your parents were hanging on for that long? Oh wow, that must have been torturous.
So when that was happening, like the whole atmosphere of the house is that in a way is like my mom is grieving, my dad is grieving, and there is really nothing to say to actually make them feel better, is that they want to see their kid.
Yeah.
And there's nothing I can offer to make it happen. And so it is also in a way a feel of powerlessness. It's like I see a problem, but I'm amazingly incapable of solving it. And it was a daily reality. And like, wake up in the morning, my mom is crying. Wake up next morning, my mom is crying. So there's really no change. And then maybe in the afternoon, she gets a call that somebody might know where the son is, and maybe she feels a bit of optimism. And then the evening comes in, and these guys don't call back because they get the money and they don't want to. And that's it. That business done for them.
Yeah.
So then the crying happens again, and that's kind of the
cycle.
The cycle. And
was there any defining moments within that period where, like the attempted kidnapping, where it became I'm going to assume there's fuel in there from this experience, but was there anything that you can pull on that's defining where you're like that drove part of the mission that you're on today?
I mean, the attempted kidnappings were actually happening in the same era where that
so
was. So it was all compact
right.
in the same time frame.
Wow.
So yeah. I mean, I think the feelings were all really getting condensed between absolute powerlessness and the feel of getting.
And then, how did you end up getting out of the country? Because it's a year later, you're 18, and you're saying to your parents, if you don't come, I'm going. Is that how does it?
So I was like constantly, begging and nagging to my parents that I have to leave. And after my school, so I had to change schools in high school because my school was constantly being targeted by rockets and bullets and all of that. And then I had to convince them that I want to go to a safer neighborhood to finish my high school, and they finally agreed. And so I told them is that...
I can just imagine the argument. Dad, I need to go to new school. But why? I keep getting shot at and there's rockets and mortars. Yeah, it's not good enough. It's like, keep going.
Because they were like, okay, like, will that create a big change? I mean, the neighborhood we live in is already unsafe. So like,
wow.
So then when I changed school, I was kind of part of the constant nagging is that as soon as I finish my high school and get my diploma, I will just leave.
Yeah.
And then they finally agreed to that. Because at the beginning it was like, oh, you're a kid, like how can you live on yourself and all of that. And I was like, I don't know, I can figure it out. It's better than what I'm living currently. And I didn't have an issue with the Iraqi government, so I was able to leave through the usual airport. So, I mean, just there were no checkpoints, no fake checkpoints. So that was a good day.
Right.
And I remember it was September 9, 2009. That's when I hopped on a plane to leave Iraq.
Right.
So
one-way ticket to Malaysia.
No, one ticket to Lebanon.
To Lebanon? Oh, yes. That's right, Lebanon.
And from Lebanon, the plan was I go to the UK to actually, my sister moved there. And the plan was like if I can move there and then continue my education and all of that. And I got accepted in multiple universities. But then because of my passport, I had an Iraqi passport, I was rejected. So I was not allowed to enter the UK. So it happened 3 times. That's also another business situation. There are you cannot like apply through the embassy directly. The embassy had these like third parties that you apply from, and in the interest of these third parties, they would like you to make a like bad application so you can pay again. So there was no incentive for them to actually. So if I made a mistake in which like I forget to put my age or they don't like tell you, oh, you've made a mistake. No, they actually leave it. So in that way you make a mistake and then you pay the application fee again.
Wow.
So that happened. So and they don't tell you like amazing refusal. Sometimes like the time is 2 months and 3 months. So when that was happening, and I started taking courses in English. And then because of the constant refusals, then one of the people at the admissions, actually at the university in Britain, was like, I'm sorry you're going through this. Like we as the university would like to accept you, but this is the laws of the land and all of that. There is similar education in Malaysia, and seems to be a safer place. and I looked at the visa requirements. You as an Iraqi can go like immediately. You don't actually need to apply for a visa. You can just fly there and then change your visa there. And I was like, cool, let me check. Seems like he's right. Then I flew to Malaysia. So I booked the flight from Lebanon, and with my suitcase.
How long were you in Lebanon?
About 9 months. About 9-10 months, yeah.
Okay.
So I lived there from September to July 2010.
And then into Malaysia, how long were you there?
So that was until I get my US acceptance. And I stayed, but also I moved around a bit, but Malaysia was my home for about 3 years.
Okay, and what did you do there in order to get by?
So I went to university there.
Okay.
And they were offering, I studied general sciences, so they were offering classes of biology, physics, chemistry, and critical thinking, which is something that I love. At the same time, I was also learning courses of web design and digital marketing. And
wow.
So I started because when I moved to Malaysia, I had no idea what's actually the next plan. There were many possibilities of moving around. In fact, Australia was on the list because it's close enough. And there were times in which I was considering taking some of these boats that go from either Indonesia or Malaysia that eventually go to Australia. But my dad was amazingly against it. So when that was happening, I applied for refugee status in Malaysia. So in Malaysia is considered a third country host. They're not the ones you become refugee at. You become refugee at countries elsewhere.
Right.
And then I get accepted to come to the United States. So that phase of life changed.
And then it was shortly thereafter you put the post on Facebook.
Yes.
And
then the family, and then moving with them, and then got promoted to move to New York.
And when was the official launch date of Ideas Beyond Borders?
It's a funny day. It's April 20th. It's not called Weed Day, but it's April 20th, 2017.
Wow.
Is when 2018, 19. Yeah, 2018. Sorry, April 20th, 2018. Because it's on this year in April is going to be our 3rd year anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah.
And in the US, how are you set up? Are you set up as a charity, a not-for-profit?
They're called non-for-profit, a 501c3. So at the beginning, it's a very long process. And back to Facebook, me and my colleague made a post looking for lawyers, and there was now a friend, and actually the chairman of the board, who found this post, and I was like, I work in this major law firm called Cleary Gottlieb. It's in downtown Manhattan. And I care about what you guys are saying. And how about I get you a deal with my law firm so they can offer you pro bono service?
Oh, wow.
And for us, as a non-profit to do international operations and stuff like that, is I don't know law at all. So it's a very complicated process in terms of how to fill the application. So that is another free service that came in.
Oh, wow.
Also in the social media world. And then we signed a contract with the law firm, and then the law firm started doing it one by one. And then in the meantime, there was something called fiscal sponsor, in which you would get until you get tax deductible status. And another friend, not from Facebook, actually, this friend is somebody I know, who was like, I'm going to offer you my non-profit status until you get yours, so you can give tax deduction to your donors. And and then things start.
So as an organization now, obviously fundraising is a big part of how you do what you do.
Definitely.
But apart from funds, is there anything else that you're looking for? How else could our community perhaps support you?
So there are many things, actually, but there's one thing that I definitely emphasize on, and it's not necessarily financial or is that many of the translators that we work with need constant emotional support.
Wow.
And there are days in which they lose their brothers, and there are days they lose their cousins,
or days they lose their house.
And there's some days they lose their house, and sometimes their family.
Yeah.
And even if they don't lose anything, they are surrounded by war and conflict. And sometimes a message from somebody living in the US or Australia or Sweden that tells them, is like, oh, I heard about you guys and what you think what you're doing is very important, it's of a great significance to them. We have, like, I mean, I do that, and every time when I do speeches and stuff, if I speak at university, then most of them don't really have income or finance to give, but for that is that this keeps many of the translators.
How do we communicate that to them? Where do we
to
go?
us. So
Okay.
if you can send us a 3-minute video
Yeah.
and send it to IBB,
Yeah.
we have a direct channel that a Gmail that can send to all the
Matty,
translators.
we're doing a video.
So that is the
and sent to you through the Facebook group?
the Facebook group, the email, the website, everything.
And the Facebook group is Ideas Beyond Borders?
Yeah, so if you go to Facebook, just search Ideas Beyond Borders, you find it there. The URL, I think, is like /Ideas Borders.
Right.
And that is, I would say, the main thing I ask.
Yeah.
Because honestly, it's like some of the translators, they say, like, we don't need the money. Like, for us, this is not, I mean, even though we do pay stipends our translator because we want to incentivize them to, because it's a lot of work. Sometimes it's 10 hours a day, or some of them are like, okay, we're just, if you don't have, because when we first started, we didn't really have much money. We had the program, but we didn't have much money. And many of them were motivated to do it before we even had the money. They're like, we trust you, we believe in we believe in the same mission you are. So when you get the money, you can send it to us. This is not a...
I want everyone who's watching this right now, pull out their iPhone, film a video, say thank you to someone you don't even know, okay, who's translating content right now for people, but for the most part are in, war-torn conflict zones who have no access to this information that we actually take for granted. Grab it right now. Actually, at the end of the podcast, do it. But yeah,
Thank you.
Also donations, that would also go a long way as well.
Donations will be wonderful.
Yeah.
Also the same, Ideas Beyond Borders /donates.
Yeah.
And we are US based nonprofits.
Okay. I'll kick the donations off. We'll donate $5,000.
Thank you.
Australian dollars to the donation. So again, if you've got the money, you don't have the time to do a video, where can they go to make a donation?
Ideas Beyond Borders /donate.
Okay, so we'll hook that up as well.
Awesome.
Because I'm inspired by what you do, mate. Like, and I have this unusual. It's not even an ability; it just happens. Like whenever I'm listening to people, their stories or stories about others, I'm constantly putting myself in their situation. Like, oh, what would that be like? And to hear your story and to look at who you are today. And again, I know this is our first meeting, but I would consider myself someone who's very intuitive. And you've got this beautiful presence, you've got this kind nature, you've got this really loving, generous heart that just wants to help people. And considering everything you've been through, I think it's just a testament to who you are, mate. So congratulations for doing what you do.
Thank you.
We can find out more about you by going to the website?
Yes.
Beyond
and
Borders?
Also more about the team and all the stuff we do, the board, pretty much all our activities.
So if there's one thing you'd like to leave the audience with, what would that be? There
is a lot of negative stories about the Middle East all the time.
Yep.
But there is a lot of good stories too, and a lot of good people.
Yes.
Always ask the question is that how does the life continue over there despite the conflict? And it is continuing because a lot of the work of many brave people who always have the will to do something good for them, for themselves, but also to the people around them. And I think this group of people are not the most represented that you hear about when you think of the Middle East. And I think that if you have the time, obviously read the negative stories, but at the same time, know that there are a lot of heroes out there who really trying to make their places to be more prosperous for them, but also for everyone else.
It's interesting, and I think there's a really solid point there in the fact that even though the war is happening wherever the wars are happening, there is an semblance, and this is what I've really learned from you, life still has to go on. Not everyone's just staying at home, packed away, protecting themselves, starving out, dying out as a nation or a country or an ethnic group, that people are carrying on. And I think it's that resilience that you are perhaps giving us an insight to that we haven't seen before of your culture and the cultures over there that, has been...
Made them keep going.
Yeah, really quite enlightening. So, mate, Faisal, I am really honoured to have spent the time with you, and I hope this is the first of many chats, but thank you so much for coming on Unstoppable.
Thank you so much.
You got it, mate.
Thank you.
This episode was brought to you by Nail It and Scale It, the world's leading fast growth program for business. There you have it, guys. Thanks for tuning into Unstoppable with me, your host, Kerwin Ray. And please do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you get to see all of these interviews in the flesh. Share this podcast with your friends and drop me a review on iTunes. I would love to hear what you guys think, and also let you know that your comments help make sure that we keep producing killer content just like this. And if you'd like to stay up to date with all of my movements, upcoming podcasts, events, and much more, please jump onto the website kerwinray.com, and also check us out on all social media on the handle @KerwinRay. Thanks for joining us.